This program was made possible with support from the Cleveland Foundation and in part by Cuyahoga County residents through Cuyahoga Arts and Culture.
These theaters are very unique. There aren't many of these movie palaces left in America. They are landmarks. They are part of what Cleveland is and was.
Just think what we would have lost. I mean, Cleveland would be so much the poorer if we didn't have PlayhouseSquare.
I'm so grateful that at a time when things look so dire, that opportunity to dream was never lost.
Vision of the people who were involved early on went way beyond simply historic preservation of a few lovely theaters and goes into the outreach into the community in a way that really, to my knowledge, has never existed anywhere before.
It went beyond just PlayhouseSquare as a notion. It was about the arts in Cleveland as an economic engine.
It is something very, very unique, and I think is a good model for other parts of the United States of America, maybe other parts of the world, to see how a community can come together and have a vision and make it happen.
Today, we are where we are. We're the largest performing arts center, second only to New York's Lincoln Center. No one would have imagined that in the 70s. No one would have imagined that in the 80s. And I'm not even certain that anyone would have imagined that in the early 90s.
Well, the 70s were a very difficult time for the city.
There was crime in downtown Cleveland.
Could the same sick mind that bombed a theater also set fire to a hotel?
The sidewalks were rolled up at 5 o'clock and everybody went home.
The city was reeling from urban unrest and the race out of the city to the suburbs.
PlayhouseSquare was a disaster because of the white flight, which was a reflection of the country.
This area was like a ghost town.
All of Euclid Avenue was empty.
There were jokes about how there was so little happening in downtown Cleveland that you could roll a bowling ball down the middle of Euclid Avenue.
The theaters had closed, and when they closed, it just emptied out.
People were moving out, and the downtown was kind of a lonely place.
It was sad. I've always loved downtown. Everybody went to the theaters when we were children and growing up in Cleveland because it was the only place you could go, downtown.
These buildings, they're all special. They were all built in a short period of time, and they were all different.
For many of us, we could remember as children, the only place to go to the movies was downtown.
I remember looking at that big screen and just being dazzled by it.
It was a place to come downtown, not only see a movie, but also see some vaudeville.
When my friends and myself would skip school, we'd come here for shows.
There was a lady by the name of Sally Rand, who was actually a fan dancer.
She had the fan over her, and I'm sure at that point in history she was wearing some kind of bodysuit that was the color of the flesh.
Very titillating kind of show for, a guy that's 15, 16, whatever we were at the time.
I think my first date with 6 women were in some theater down here, standing in line outside, and all the theaters were lined up with people to get in. It was really kind of an interesting place.
I was courting my wife, Janet, and I courted her at those theaters. In the old days, they used to have these photographers on the street that snap your picture. That's the first picture that we have in our photo album of our life together.
None of these theaters have been used at all for any purpose whatsoever for a long time.
They were falling apart.
Water had been leaking through here for years.
The damage was devastating.
The theaters were virtually unusable.
It was like hopeless.
Plaster was falling in the auditorium almost constantly, like a light rainfall of plaster. All the theater seats were gone. The floor looked like a washboard. The stage itself was in ruins. There was just no way that that space could be used by the general public.
The Ohio Theater, unfortunately, was very badly damaged in a fire. It was all red and then all just peeled away. It had a lot of water damage, so any of the plaster areas were just crumbling away.
The palace was not usable because we didn't have sufficient lighting instruments. The dressing rooms were a dreary mess. From a theatrical production point of view, we didn't have what we needed to make that work.
The Allen was, oddly enough, was in a little better shape and had been used as a laserium, where people would get high and lean back in airline seats and look up at this laser show in the sky.
We really didn't have a use for it at the time, so it was a matter of just making sure that it didn't deteriorate or it didn't get torn down by a developer or anything.
The disrepair was so massive, you couldn't even begin to think of where you might go to begin to save these spaces.
And just about that time, Ray Shepherdson had come to town.
Ray was one of the most interesting characters that I've ever met.
He's crazy. He was somewhat eccentric.
Ray Shepherdson is a genius.
I came to Cleveland in '68, graduating from college. I was a 26-year-old kid, farm kid from Seattle. And I wasn't real refined.
At the time, he was working for the Cleveland Board of Education, and he was looking for a place. He was recruiting new teachers to the Board of Education from all over the country, and he was looking for a place in which these teachers could gather. And he came upon the PlayhouseSquare theaters.
The main theaters were the Allen Theater, the Ohio Theater, the State Theater, and the Palace Theater.
And when he walked into the theaters, it was a transforming moment in his life.
He had seen the magnificent murals by James Dougherty, and he looked around and saw the general architecture, which even swathed in cobwebs and with rats running around, you could see the quality.
And then, of course, because he's such a visionary, he immediately saw it as all kinds of other things.
Basically, what we want to do is take the 4 closed PlayhouseSquare theaters and use them again.
Here's an idea. Let's save these theaters. What a crazy idea that must have seemed like.
But think about it, I mean, who would not use those buildings? I mean, who wouldn't? And again, I didn't, you know, why were they closed? I mean, how could this happen? And all I need to do is point this out, and pfft, everybody's going to be like, wow, what a great idea. Not so. It's like, who's this nutcase?
I said, Mr. Shepherdson, people don't go out to ventures like that. They entertain in their home, and a lot of people boast that they haven't been downtown in 15 years.
What I said to him was, you know, this is an impossible dream, but it's something you certainly should pursue.
And at that point in that startup, it's straight uphill for everybody.
We started selling the lifetime memberships in the PlayhouseSquare Association, which was a huge mistake. You never have a lifetime anything. You want it every year, but I didn't know what I was doing.
They would go out on speaking engagements and they would say, we're promoting PlayhouseSquare. We are basically offering memberships to PlayhouseSquare as founding members.
And we'd have events that you'd be first invited to, and you know, that it later developed into perks. But you basically nothing. It was a way of supporting the idea of saving PlayhouseSquare.
The Ohio Theater, which was built as a legitimate theater, would be restored as a legitimate theater, seating 100 people.
My form of management is charismatic leadership featuring total chaos.
Ray was not the greatest businessman, but we knew what Ray wanted to do, and it was a dream and a goal that we all shared.
He was convincing it could work. It was going to do this, and we need to get the community around it. We need some startup money. You know, he had it all laid out, and he had, if you had a question, he had 2 answers for it. He was thorough.
The work that needs to be done is from here on.
I talked to the owners of the Allen Theater to let me I will manage the Allen Theater for you. I will give you all the rent in return for whenever I want to do a show, I can do a show, and I can keep the concessions.
We still had the original theater seats. There was still enough equipment that he could do shows on stage. So he was able to operate this theater as a theater.
So I started bringing other things in. The first thing I did was the Budapest Symphony Orchestra. And we had the largest Hungarian population outside of Budapest. I figured we'd probably get a crowd for that Budapest Symphony Orchestra.
And I remember calling all the Hungarians and Hungarian newspapers trying to get them interested and bring money down. And they did, and they filled the place. They were delighted. There was enormous community pride.
Unfortunately, it was a winter day. It snowed. The skylight was broken. So while they were playing, the snow came down. And they were such good sports because, you know, fiddle players are not supposed to play in the cold.
That really kicked it off because it gave certain credibility and legs to the issues that he kept saying will work, it'll work, and nobody would believe him but would still peel the paint.
You know, something that seems to be just going along smoothly usually doesn't work because inertia overtakes it.
The Plain Dealer, May 25th, 1972. Lowe's, Ohio and State Theaters to be razed, by William F. Miller. The vacant Lowe's, Ohio and State Theaters on Cleveland's Playhouse Square will be razed to make way for a giant parking lot. Ray K. Shepherdson said a critical situation has been reached, unless Clevelanders come forward with money to implement his organization's plan. The state and Ohio theaters are doomed, he said.
I can only imagine how your heart would race because you come into this building, you are so enchanted with what's here, you fall in love with it, and then someone's going to grab it and take it away.
When the announcement of the possible demolishing of these theaters came up, that stirred the Junior League and everybody else.
I thought it was pretty cool because it really got people charged up. More so than any speech I could give.
I was visited by Ray Shepherdson and Will York and Laney Haddon, who asked me to represent the three of them before the Fine Arts Committee of the Cleveland City Council to resist the demolition of the building.
Pudge was a Playhouse guy and saw the value, big downtown lawyer. Pudge was marvelous.
We are now in front of the Lowe's building. All of the structure, which is immediately behind us to the north, would have been demolished.
Brilliant lawyers do wonderful things. He said, we can't have another curb cut or two on Euclid Avenue.
It was the need for a curb cut here onto Euclid Avenue that gave us the opening to be able to raise the issue of whether the demolition of the building was really appropriate or not. The committee members discussed it, were thoroughly engaged, and therefore they asked the representatives of Millcap Corporation to see if a rental arrangement couldn't be reached.
One of the biggest challenges was speed. I mean, I'm just amazed how people rallied so quickly because those buildings were going.
And then, thank God, along comes the Junior League of Cleveland.
The idea that they were going to raise the theaters, that Ray Shepherdson's dreams would go to dust, allowed us to vote them the biggest amount of money we'd ever put into a project.
The Plain Dealer, June 3rd, 1972. Junior League pledges cash to save theaters, by William F. Miller. The Junior League of Cleveland guaranteed $25,000 to the Playhouse Square Association yesterday in an effort to save the Lowe's, Ohio and State Theaters from demolition. Laney Haddon, the League's past president, said members were convinced Ray Shepherdson's plans are sound. All that is needed is money and community interest, she said.
Without the support of the Junior League, I'm not sure we would have made it off the dime in the very beginning. You know, those influential women that were in the community at that time really rallied in many public ways, such as their very generous support and a lot of behind the scenes.
Because we were all so excited about it, we generated that excitement to our husbands and brothers and fathers-in-law and fathers, and they began to catch that fire. As someone said, junior leaguers sleep with the most powerful men in Cleveland, their husbands. We also talked to them.
Laney Haddon, who was the president of the Junior League, became very friendly with Ray Shepherdson and became one of his principal disciples. And so that when you saw Laney coming, you knew you were going to talk about Playhouse Square and Ray Shepherdson, and that was terrific because with Laney's energy it created a buzz about Playhouse Square that without her it wouldn't have happened.
The reality is that when he put Laney and the Junior League around him, that gave him some depth.
What in the hell do you do with 3 huge theaters and one 1,100 seater? I mean, it was like nuts. So I tried to figure out how you use these theaters and what else can you do besides theater.
And then along in time is this show that's running in town called Jacques Brel is Alive and Well and Living in Paris.
Seal Hartman, who was working with Ray and all of us on this project, said there is supposed to be a wonderful show at Cleveland State, just up the street.
And on the last performance of the last night of the show, Ray Shepherdson and his wife Seal came to the show.
And so I saw it in this ridiculous classroom where the armrests come up and you can do tests, and I had this religious experience. It was like this phenomenal, and I'm a theater, I love theater, this phenomenal theater experience in a classroom.
He said after the show, I would like to present this show at Playhouse Square, and I said, Raymond, it's impossible, you have no space to present it in.
I said, this will be perfect for the Playhouse Square Cabaret, and Joe said, you don't have a cabaret. I said, but we will.
We left the theater at Cleveland State, walked down here to the theaters in Playhouse Square. Ray unlocked the State Theater and started frantically walking around, as anybody who knows Ray and when he's in his major thinking process.
He recognized the potential of that unusual lobby of the State Theater.
When we all met in the lobby of the theater, I realized that it was no longer a matter of should we do it, it was a matter of we will do it. It was very clear.
You get things done in the amount of time that you're allowed to do them, and it was pretty clear that no one had a lot of time to think about this. You had to make it happen.
Everyone just had this commitment to make this work.
I started mopping floors and fixing the roof and taking out trash and scrubbing the restrooms.
We built a stage.
I had to build a kitchen.
We got a caterer.
Raymond gathered chandeliers. I borrowed cabling from Cleveland State.
Playing a hallway was a bitch.
Acoustically, it was terrible.
The sound really sucked.
The side seats, quite frankly, were dreadful seats.
We laid down $2 a yard orange Mohawk carpet for acoustics.
We were selling tickets for $7.75, which included the Brel performance, a buffet dinner, and a bottle of wine at the table.
It was a nice bottle of wine, and that lasted a week because it totally killed the bar business. I go like, what an idiot.
There was a handyman who worked here at Playhouse Square. Never could have happened without him. His name was Smitty.
He was from the farm outside, someplace out in Missouri.
And Smitty had a very sort of chic bachelor pad upstairs where he had like 16 urinals in his bedroom.
He was an electrician, I think. I think he was a real electrician. He was pretending to be an electrician.
Smitty was so exhausted getting the show ready that when I finally stood at the light booth with Bob Rohde for the show to begin, I realized that Smitty was sitting next to the stage and had fallen sound asleep, and his head was sort of resting on the edge of the stage. And he stayed there through the whole opening of the show, asleep.
I think there were about 100 people there, and the tables were all sort of spread out so we'd look like we had more people than we did. And we were very surprised. I mean, we had done the show before, but this time, people went crazy. And they hollered and threw napkins in the air, and we all just thought, wow.
The Plain Dealer, April 23rd, 1973. Cabaret Theater, off to a good start here, by Peter Bellamy. The show is Jacques Brel is alive and well and living in Paris. It is a musical with more intelligent, civilized comment on life, love, tragedy, and the sins and woes of this planet. Located in the lobby of the Old State Theater, the new PlayhouseSquare Cabaret has opened in a blaze of glory.
In '73, people didn't come through the front doors of the theater. They came through a side door that's a fire exit today, and it was a fire exit then, off of East 17th Street. They came into the back of the auditorium, paid for their tickets, walked upstairs onto the mezzanine level of the lobby of the State Theater where they had cocktails. Meanwhile, down here on the main floor, this was filled with tables and chairs. And at a certain point, they would come down, they would be seated, eat the meal, have a drink. Waiters and waitresses would clear the tables, and then we'd be ready for the show.
And we came down those stairs every night and did the show, and people took us into their hearts.
I loved Jacques Brel. I thought it was a great show. I must have seen it 15 times.
I don't know, at least 20 times.
I think 31 or 2 times.
How many? Not did I ever go, how many? Many times.
And you went because you wanted to support it, even though you'd seen the show so many times.
I still talk to people who talk about Jacques Brel as though it was a religious experience.
You felt a closeness to the performers, and each of the four, Cliff Bemis and David Frazier and Terry Pidio and Prov Hollander, understood that relationship with the audience so well.
Just grabbed you and just carried you straight through. And by the time it was over, you said, wait a minute, I don't want this to end.
After the show, we'd always go down and have a drink, and the waitress came over and said, this man who's sitting over there, he wants to talk to you. And I went over and said, hi. He said, you know, I work in a steel mill. I've never been in the theater. I didn't know anything about the theater. And I came tonight, and I looked around at all these people, and I thought, I'm feeling the same thing they are. I'm enjoying this.
The idea that live performance is gone forever. It's just a memory. That's powerful. Well, you feel pretty good. How is it that the first show you actually produced becomes the longest running show in Cleveland history? What are the chances of that? And if it didn't work, it wouldn't have worked.
Had Jacques Brel not been successful, it would have been very, very difficult for us to create the longevity that would allow us ultimately to get to the renovation of the theaters themselves.
That gave the opportunity for people to come together at Playhouse Square and not only dream about what Playhouse Square might be, but what the city of Cleveland could be again. It was a powerful, powerful time in the city's history.
I think all of us knew that something was going to happen, something was coming, But I don't think any of us could dream that big. Maybe Ray Shepherdson could dream that big. But I think the rest of us were just along for the ride of our lives.
This is a start, and Clevelanders have to realize this is a start, and now's the time to get on the bandwagon, get in the ground floor, really.
We thought that because we now had control of more than one theater, that we had to do some programming in other theaters, and the logical space was in the grand lobby of the Palace Theater.
And the first production we presented in this space was the rise and fall of the entire world as seen through the eyes of Cole Porter.
We followed that with another show in here called Alice at the Palace.
And then after that came marvelous, wacky things like El Grande de Coca-Cola.
Which was a perfect show for this auditorium. We did it in the summer. The show was supposed to take place in a nightclub in Honduras, a rundown nightclub in Honduras, and this place looked like a rundown nightclub. And we had no air conditioning, and it was summer, and it felt like Honduras.
There are more major entertainment things planned. For example, bringing in big name entertainment.
We started bringing in folks like Della Reese and Gilbert Humperdinck.
Mary, you had a chance to go through the Palace Theater today. What do you think of our Playhouse Square in Cleveland?
It's fantastic. I just think it's so exciting. The whole restoration program there is wonderful. And I think people here should be very proud of it.
In the olden days, we worried a lot about where's our next dollar coming from and how are we going to pay this act tonight.
I mean, on Saturdays, sometimes we would have to count the audience to make certain there was enough money for everyone to be paid and that we really could open the next week. It was that fragile.
How do you drum up an audience to come and see some of these productions, especially when they're originals?
Ticket sales, bar sales, that's all we had. And some days that worked, some days that may not have been quite enough.
Cher was signed in to perform, and we had $1 million in advance ticket sales.
And we had spent all the ticket money.
Cher canceled, and we had to find $1 million to repay the people who had bought all those tickets. That's when I have visions of Henkel marching up and down Euclid Avenue, knocking on every bank door he could find for some cash.
There were many instances of 2 steps forward, 8 steps back, 1 step forward, 12 steps back. It's astounding that Playhouse Square survived the first decade.
The folks in City Hall and in the foundations and in the corporations said, boys, this has got to become more sophisticated.
You know, it's fine and dandy to have volunteers and people who are willing to quit their jobs and make low amounts of money come in and do the things that needed to be done on a daily basis, but you needed to think bigger.
One of the things that worried businessmen was Playhouse Square Association, people that really meant well, and frankly probably down the road were behind a lot of the support Playhouse Square got, but they were not the people to run the organization. We needed to have a body that was in control, that could go out and represented potential donors, that they ran things.
The very first thing to be done was to find someone, an architect most probably, who could do a master plan of Playhouse Square.
They hired me to help mothball these theaters, you know, because they were leaking and we just didn't want them to deteriorate any further. And in doing that work, I thought, well, gosh, we should have a bigger plan. So we built a model of the whole area. It suggested underused properties, how they might be changed, for instance, a hotel, a museum of light, office buildings, parking structures, other theaters. These were just possibilities that over 20, 30 years, something could continue to grow.
So they saw that, yeah, it's great to have a few wonderful theaters and then to have a little organization that can book those theaters, but they went well beyond that and they started to develop the community around it.
When we bought the Black Angus restaurant on the corner of 14th and Huron out of bankruptcy for just a song, and we converted it to the rusty scupper. We brought rusty scupper in from California. People said that couldn't be done. Well, we did it, and we then controlled a key piece of real estate in Playhouse Square. Likewise, we bought the Wyness and Point building for almost nothing, and that's where the Wyndham Hotel stands today.
And that's what really made Playhouse Square in Cleveland unique, is they had a vision early on that they needed to come in and develop the whole package.
Playhouse Square is trying to figure out what it wants to be. It's a little uncertain. There is the dream. There's a big dream about what it could be in terms of a performing arts center. Yet at the same time, when Playhouse Square is trying to present things on the stages, that is not really being successful for the organization.
That's a time when we had real concerns on the board because frankly, we didn't think we had the best staff talent, and some of us were quite concerned that, gee, maybe we ought not be in this thing, and we're going to find ourselves in real trouble.
There is a sentiment among the trustees and a knowledge among the trustees that in the wide business community, that there is not really a respect for the organization or a belief that the organization is going to be able to pull it off.
Ray Shepherdson was perfect for the role he was playing in trying to stir up interest in the theaters. But he let his hair grow very long, and he was an unkempt kind of a guy, and he looked like he was right out of the Bowery. And that didn't bring on the support and enthusiasm of the business community.
The Plain Dealer, December 24th, 1979. Idealist Shepherdson leaves, seeks new theater challenges. By William F. Miller. Ray K. Shepherdson dared to dream big dreams and to make those dreams come true. He was dismissed by downtown businessmen as a romantic idealist when he began his crusade to save the Playhouse Square district almost a decade ago. Shepherdson said he is not bitter and has no regrets.
I was planning to leave. I was starting to thinking about leaving 2 years before I left. I'd done everything I could do, and what I was starting to do I thought was damaging.
We were all moving on, all of us, and we all knew, we knew that Playhouse Square would have its own life, and we knew that it would require different kinds of people.
It's hard to let go. But letting go actually is a good thing. You have to move on.
They asked me what the hardest part of the restoration was, and I said, say goodbye, and I just broke down. It was just like, that's crazy. How can you, it's just thinking about it, it's like saying goodbye to all these wonderful people was really, it's the hardest part.
The transformation that occurred from the late 70s to the early 80s was enhanced measurably by bringing people on board the Playhouse Square Board of Trustees who had experience in the business community, who were savvy about how to finance enterprises like this.
We lined up 4 top executives in Cleveland and asked those 4 executives, would you be consultants to us, and would you serve as a resource for the business community in general to know that what we're doing is okay and makes sense and adds up.
And if I had to identify one definable moment when the business community started to take us more seriously was when the Cleveland Foundation lent their considerable voice to what we were doing here.
The Plain Dealer, June 26, 1980. Playhouse Square awarded grant for theater renovation. By William F. Miller. The Cleveland Foundation awarded yesterday a $710,000 grant to the Playhouse Square Foundation for the renovation and operation of the theater complex. Stanley Pace, Cleveland Foundation chairman, said, We believe that PlayhouseSquare Foundation has developed sound plans for the future and competent management to carry them out.
That made people feel, in the business community, feel a lot more comfortable. Here was the money coming in, although it was from a foundation and not from another corporation. But when Ohio followed with $500,000, that said to the business community, here's a business corporation jumping into this. That was a big, big success story.
The activity in Playhouse Square beginning in 1980 really began to accelerate. We were building community support. We were putting performances on stage that people could get enthusiastic about.
At some point it was announced that we got a bunch of money and we're going to renovate the Ohio Theater. And it was done because the Great Lakes Shakespeare Festival at that time was looking for a new home.
It was George Voinovich who had the joy of saying the Great Lakes Shakespeare Festival is going to move from Lakewood and make the Ohio Theater its home.
Vincent Dowling was the artistic director for Great Lakes Shakespeare Festival, as it was known in those days. Vincent had in mind building a playhouse theater out on Lake Erie.
I had him to the office and I said to him, you know, I'm not going to be supportive of it there on the lakefront, but I will be supportive of it if you decide to put it in Playhouse Square.
Vincent said, we can't because they can't get it ready for us. The mayor turns to me and says, John, I want the theater ready for them by July 1, 1982, period. That was the end of the meeting.
I wanted to make sure everybody knew that these things that were happening downtown were not just for a few people, but they were for the entire community. Maybe someone that never would go to the theaters, at least they should understand the theaters help to make the town more competitive.
The Ohio was in terrible shape. In fact, we almost gutted the whole thing. There was still a roof. I don't remember that it was open to the sky at all, but everything had burned. So this is all new and with a modest budget to create an elegant room.
The Ohio Theater was designed as a legitimate theater to do shows like Shakespeare, Shaw, that kind of thing. So restoring it for Great Lakes Shakespeare Festival got us away from being a presenter of cabaret-style shows and got us into the role of landlord as well as producer and presenter of performances.
With the successful completion of the renovation of the Ohio Theater, we had engaged a consultant to help us identify somebody who really could take Playhouse Square to a whole new level.
We began to bring in people that knew something about theater, i.e. Larry Welker.
I began at Playhouse Square in early March of 1982. The job basically was to run the place on a day-to-day basis, to raise the money for its operation and for the renovation of the theaters in Playhouse Square.
Larry brought a sense of the theater, a sense of what theaters could provide, and all brought a professionalism to our operation.
When I came in, I realized that we had to really organize differently, that we had to put a focus on not only on what happens in the theaters, because if we don't have quality shows in the theaters, it doesn't matter what else we do. That was number one.
He could articulate the future for this organization, and that gave everyone the belief that, you know what, this is possible.
I think we really felt that we had turned a corner when we opened the State Theater.
The State Theater was a big, big move forward.
Well, the State was a very large, very beautiful theater. The lobby murals had appeared on the cover of Life magazine in the 1950s. They were such an important work of art.
You know, the State is the largest of the theaters, and there's the hope then with the State that we have more resident companies. The ballet is here, the opera, the Cleveland Opera is here. It gives a sense of grandness to what is going on in the project and a root in the community that was really desperately needed.
When we moved into the state, we of course wanted to use it for opera and ballet. For that, all we had to do was build a bigger stage.
This is one huge stage. And then that grid is 80 feet up in the air.
That alone was about a $6 or $8 million project to knock down the old stage house and build a new modern stage house.
The idea was to make sure that this building was really a first-class machine, really.
Just by sheer size, a sellout in the state is triple the attendance that it is in the Ohio Theater. So the idea of what you're doing for the city when you see 3,000 people rushing in the door has a different kind of adrenaline flow to it than when 900 people are rushing into the Ohio.
The Plain Dealer, June 10th, 1984. Believers Enjoy Opening Night by Nancy Bigler-Kersey. It was the long-awaited unveiling of PlayhouseSquare Center, attended by 1,580 paying guests for the sit-down dinner. It begins the end of a dream and the start of a legacy for Cleveland, said John F. Lewis. Lewis singled out 3 individuals with special praise: Ray Shepherdson for his dream, Laney Haddon for standing behind him, and William F. Miller, Plain Dealer reporter, for backing the project all the way.
The opening of the state was phenomenal. Everybody turned out for that. It was a gala evening.
There was this huge celebration. There was this, aha, we've made it.
I think people really began to understand that one day all of these theaters were going to be renovated and providing performing spaces for the people, not then just of Northeast Ohio, but from a wide swath of the Midwest.
PlayhouseSquare has some measurable success. We have important resident companies between these 2 theaters now. You've gathered up many of the art forms and you've placed them here at PlayhouseSquare. There was actually a belief that, you know, we're done.
There was a period there where it looked like things they'd reached a point where there didn't seem to be the extra effort that was needed to carry and the marathon, okay?
Remember, it was built as a rebirth for live entertainment in downtown Cleveland. We're talking about the revitalization of PlayhouseSquare. Years of sweaty work restoring the state and Ohio theaters ended back in June with a gala reopening celebration down there. But now that the streamers have come down, we've been wondering if the millions of dollars poured into this district are now paying off.
There was still this sense that PlayhouseSquare may not make it.
Mid-'80s was a particularly difficult time. Dollars were very scarce.
But the palace, I think, was still hanging out there. And the question is, are we going to get that done? And if we don't get that done, we're going to have kind of this thing hanging out there.
What has happened so far is that 2 theaters are open. The 3rd theater, the Palace, is going to need about $4 million more in contributions.
So we had to develop a new idea and effort to try to raise money, both from the public community and the corporate community.
There always were people who would say, well, you've got 2 theaters. You need 3 theaters in Cleveland? How are you ever going to sell enough tickets to have people come to 3 theaters? You're crazy.
When the Palace is finally open, that will give the Playhouse complex about 7,000 seats. How in the world are they going to fill that many seats?
That, Ted, is the $64 million question.
We convinced the Federal Reserve to do a study of the economic impact of PlayhouseSquare. And what it demonstrated was that the theaters were bringing in annually what they call $40 million in export income annually, money brought in from outside the community into the community, which wouldn't be there if the theaters were not operating. And that became a major tool that allowed us to push the fundraising over the top.
One of the things that you do in order to get people fired up is you have projects that show the communities coming together and they can see physical improvement being made.
It restored a sense of confidence in the city of Cleveland that we could do something that was of major proportion When our damper was down, we were able to turn it around and start to look at things in a much more positive light.
We don't have Times Square, but we've got a lot of bright lights on Playhouse Square.
But they're hoping here on Playhouse Square that what starts tonight could become a tradition for many years to come.
The party we are talking about is one on Playhouse Square downtown.
All three theaters' lobbies were opened up to have parties, and each of them had a different motif.
It wasn't too many years ago that Playhouse Square was really nearly on its deathbed, and now it's come back with the opening of the theaters, of course, and the opening of 6 to 8 to 10 new restaurants. And we're hoping that this calls for revitalization of the area.
I got a phone call from Larry Welker, who said, "George and Barbara Bush had me over to their house last night. They want me to go down and run the Kennedy Center." I said, wow. So we started a nationwide search to replace him. And we'd got people from Boston, Chicago, LA, San Francisco, Florida, New York, all over the place. And we also talked to people here in town. And one that began to appear very interesting to us was Art Falco.
And when we came right down to it, we looked in our own backyard and looked at Art Falco and said, wait a minute, we may have the person in art that has the ability to carry this organization forward.
I felt that he was the best person to lead the organization, and I told the board so.
Art was an accountant both by training and profession, and he was a wonderful and very loyal lieutenant to Larry while Larry was here.
Larry Welker was a great mentor to me because I had no performing arts, I had no nonprofit experience, so I learned the theater business. He essentially tutored me.
People who worked with Art loved him. He was a very decisive manager, but gentle in his approach.
I can see us pretty easily getting to 29 million. It's going to be that last $3 million we're going to have to kick and scratch and whatever.
He's very smart, he's very creative, he has a good business sense, and that it would be a very smooth transition, but it wouldn't be status quo.
We spent a few years trying to determine what to do with that theater. We knew that Great Lakes Theater Festival was in the need of a 500-seat theater. The Ohio Theater had served their needs for essentially 20-plus years, and so we approached them and said, do you have an interest in moving over to the Hannah? And they said in about 1 nanosecond, absolutely, and now it is just a magnificent theater space.
It's just remarkable how Art has been able to put together the operations of the theaters with our commercial operations in an absolutely seamless fashion.
I'm now known on the board for saying, Art, when are you going to bring us some bad news?
We did have a couple of disappointments. One was...
Because every meeting we have, it's something more and something big and something different.
Now, on to the Allen Theater project. This will be one of only 3 theaters in the country that is in this type of configuration. The director can decide how they want the seating laid out. So either in the round, proscenium style, runway, and then if you look north, that steel that's going up will be the 150-seat laboratory theater.
Right now we're getting ready to reopen the Allen Theater on September 16, 2011, and the workers are putting the last finishing touches on it. We have changed the auditorium radically. Seating capacity has been cut from 2,500 to 500.
It's a totally different look. As I say, it's taken, what, 40 years to fulfill the dream. And now this would be the last theater on the list, and all of a sudden we have a very intense use program for it.
One of the reasons, again, that Playhouse Square has been successful is the fact that we love to partner, because we believe that bringing partnerships together means that we're all stronger.
We are at an historic moment at the Playhouse in moving from 8500 Euclid to the welcoming arms of the PlayhouseSquare family with our wonderful partners at Cleveland State University.
It's a stunning, stunning theater. It is a contemporary design inside of an historic shell. And we don't know of any other building like that in the country. And I think we should toast to the power of three and the future of Cleveland. Hear, hear. Hear, hear.
There was always this sense, even in the early days, that we had to create an enticing neighborhood.
The organization decided that it was in its best interest and strategy to try to control some of the real estate in the neighborhood.
Playhouse Square today is one of the largest property owners of downtown Cleveland.
In today's world, we have 10 spaces that range from a 100-seat club to a 3,000-seat theater.
They said, well, yeah, if we want a really robust community here, we've got to have a hotel. So what did they do? They partnered with one of the big national hotel chains.
And maybe we ought to start to enhance our restaurant capability.
Perhaps a parking garage.
A big office building was built across the way.
We had to buy the Hannah building, and the Hannah Theater came along for the ride.
I mean, the Idea Stream building is a perfect fit.
Where we have this technological partnership, it's an entire mix.
Through the arts, we've revitalized this neighborhood, and I think it's the spearhead for revitalization in Cleveland.
When you really get vitality and robustness in an arts community, then you find that you have businesses from other parts of the country who will be attracted.
You know, our view is that this needs to be a 24/7 neighborhood where people not only are working, not only are coming to see entertainment and quality theater, but also that live here.
They have developed it in a really people-oriented way with lots of free activities, a wonderful sort of pedestrian landscape so it feels good to walk around.
Now it's not just a matter of, well, we need to renovate a few theaters. Now it's, how do we create the most dynamic neighborhood, not just in the city, but one of the more dynamic neighborhoods in the country. In the early days, there was a thought that, gee, that Playhouse Square had little economic impact to the local community. And today, in a very conservative sense, it's well over $43 million a year. Probably the best return on investment of any project of this scale in the community.
It has helped to restore the confidence of the people who live in the Cleveland area in Cleveland.
When Playhouse Square started to be developed, it was clear that Cleveland was in a pretty bad situation and there wouldn't be any significant downtown Cleveland if it weren't for this.
The preservation of Playhouse Square has given Cleveland a chance to realize how beautiful it is.
To think that you could draw hundreds of thousands of people or 1 million people a year, I mean, that was unfathomable.
It's really a story about a community coming together over a project that not everyone believed could happen, but I think they deep down believed that it was worth trying.
I will never be part of anything like this again in my life. I've done some wonderful things, I've traveled, I've met great artists, I've done great things, but this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for those of us that were here.
And it was the high point of our lives.
It's very humbling to realize that you're part of something that is so enormous, that has such impact.
I don't know. I mean, I was a kid. This was it. Maybe I saw it in Ray's eyes that, you know, this would be really ugly if it didn't get restored. What replaces something like this? You know, nothing replaces it. Certainly not a parking lot.
This program was made possible with support from the Cleveland Foundation and in part by Cuyahoga County residents through Cuyahoga Arts and Culture.